Keynote, or if you've been here all day, we are really so happy to have you. I'm very excited to introduce Jill Petty as our keynote speaker this afternoon. Jill has more than 15 years of experience working in nonprofit independent publishing. She has acquired and developed books that explore a range of social justice issues at presses including South End Press, Beacon Press, and Northwestern University Press, so really covering the gamut from scholarly publishing to sort of crossover trade, serious academic publishing. She has held also communication roles for the NGOs Partners in Health and Justice, Partners in Health and Equal Justice Initiative, and she's currently a communications officer for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the United States. Established in 1930, the Kellogg Foundation centers racial equality, the health and well-being of children, and community building in all its funding initiatives. And Jill does a lot of advocating and project building and management. She's described it as racial healing and racial justice, so I'm sure we'll hear about that, which I'm very excited about. Jill's also a longtime member of the teaching collective for the Prison Plus Neighborhood Arts Project, an arts and humanities project based at Stateville Correctional Center near Chicago. And she's a co-editor of a book called The Long Term, Resisting Life Sentences, Working Toward Freedom, which was published by Haymarket Books just last year in 2018. Jill holds a Master of Arts degree from Duke University in English and a Bachelor of Arts in English from Grinnell College. We're so excited to have her here, and thank you so much. Welcome, Jill.
There's a really lovely saying at the Kellogg Foundation that I really kind of found myself drawn to. When people are learning new things, they say, we're going to give you some grace. So give me some grace. This is like the first time I've done a very long form kind of PowerPoint. And also, whatever you guys think, it's pretty easy. How about this? This is great. This is great. Sorry. So thank you for giving me grace as I made some adjustments here. And Paul is going to help me with the PowerPoint, so I'll be looking over here occasionally to say please. But I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be here with everybody on this beautiful February afternoon. I'm honored to be the keynote speaker at the first University of Illinois Press Publishing Symposium. And I hope it's the first of many convenings of its kind. I love the idea of people coming together to learn about publishing, make it less scary, make it more accessible, level the power dynamic a bit. I'm all for that. So it's really lovely to be involved in this kind of endeavor, first time out. Happy Black History Month. And some additional notes of gratitude. I wish to acknowledge that we are speaking on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piyantashawh, Wea, Miami, Muscatine, Ottawa, Sioux, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these native nations prior to forced removal. These lands continue to carry the story of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. So, big gratitude. So, I'm going to jump down here. I'm also very grateful to Lori Matheson, Director of the University of Illinois Press, for inviting me to speak, and to Julie Lout, with Lori, the co-creator of the Symposium, and the superb engine behind it. I've seen her all over the place at work. And for offering constant, consistent support, assistance, and directions as plans for the conference unfolded. And also thank you to Alice Innes for kindness and logistical support if you're in the room. And regarding planning, support, and implementation for the symposium, huge thanks to Professor Oliver, Cynthia Oliver, and Maria Gilombardo. Is Maria here? Very good. In the Vice Chancellor's Office of Research Advising and Project Development, also to the Office of the Vice President for Academic Affairs, the Illinois Program for Research in Humanities, especially Jennifer Hood, the Center for Advanced Study, and the Unit for Criticism and Interpretive Theory. So, some information about me. I currently work as a communications and policy officer for the Kellogg Foundation, but have had a long career in social justice publishing. My first book publishing job was at South End Press, then located in Cambridge, and some of my SCP babies are here. Books that I acquired and developed over 6.5, 7 years. Best job I ever had. Hardest job I ever had. I also worked at Beacon Press, and some of my Beacon acquisitions are here. And most recently, I worked at Northwestern University Press, and some of my NUP acquisitions are here. Good pace, you guys can see them. So this has been a full day of energizing discussions about endeavors that I care very much about, making thoughtful, compelling, and necessary books for as many readers as possible. There is no better time to be doing this than now, as Lori noted this morning. But my joy at joining you is tempered by some feelings of bewilderment, frustration, and impatience about the industry that I've worked in for a very long time. So the bottom line question for me in this talk is, why is our industry so overwhelmingly white? What are industry leaders doing poorly? And what can they do better? Moreover, which currently circulating narratives and actions about race and representation in publishing serve radical transformation and change? And which narratives and actions serve and maintain what I will call for now the status quo? Because there is so much to think about, I thought it might be easiest to organize this talk somewhat chronologically and start in the room and and think about what brought us here. I think of us all as book people. If you're in the room, you must love books, right? So, I already gave it away. So the question I had is, why do some of us in the room do what we do as copy editors, acquisitions editors, marketers, publicists, press board members, designers, distribution folks, people who work in rights and permissions? Why have some of us chosen to work in a highly competitive and bottom line driven industry, an industry shaped by corporate norms, even though we work for nonprofits often in the university press world, right? Even as we operate as nonprofits, and where most of us, relatively speaking, are undercompensated. What has kept us engaged, even when feeling underpaid, let me make sure you're good, thank you, undervalued, undersupported, under-resourced, and almost always overworked. And for folks in the room who are not in the business, what is drawing you to a conference centered on an industry that is constantly at death's door, according to many media reports and pundits? Or at least where our fate seems to precariously rest on the edge of a cliff, where we're regularly besieged by rapidly advancing technology that may wipe out paper books at any moment, downward trends in reading by the general public, and lately the unpredictable impacts of revenge-induced tariffs. I've worked in publishing, and more specifically social justice publishing, for long enough to know that for many people, the answer is they love books. It's plain and simple. For my afflicted cohort, and for me, this means that every time you walk into a bookstore or library, you get like a little buzz, a little contact high. There's a frisson, a tingle, a sense of positive expectation. So this is why we are here. Because if you didn't feel that way, you wouldn't be here. And this was certainly true for me at the beginning of my 9 lives journey in social justice publishing. I love books, always have, always will. I was always a reader, at 9 or 10 years old, I would slip out of sleepover confessions to read the comic books or novels that I brought from home, or I'd plop down with the discoveries from my friends' shelves. And this was in the 1970s and 80s. Our family lived in Chicago and Chatham, and then in Hyde Park on Chicago's South Side. And all three of us were fast reading, like my mom, 3 daughters. And it was important for us to know what was going on and to be able to discuss the events of the day. This was a value in my home. So I also remember sitting at the table, kitchen table with my father, purposely reading through the Chicago Sun-Times and the Chicago Daily News. I'm dating myself, which were delivered to our house. More critically, my journey to publishing was also paved by visits to my mother's vast and idiosyncratic library, which I regularly pillaged. Naomi was a Chicago public school teacher, a gifted pianist and vocalist, and a voracious reader. She read Agatha Christie mysteries, westerns by Louis L'Amour, Lillian Jackson's Brown's The Cat Who mysteries. She read James Michener. She read a lot of stuff. And over time, she read probably every Black woman writer that most of you could name in the room, or maybe everybody. It's a smart room. On my mother's overcrowded bookshelves, I encountered Toby K. Bambara, Alice Walker, Gail Jones, Ntozake Shange, Rosa Guy, Michelle Wallace, Barbara Neely, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez, Maya Angelou, and Polly Murray. So people say that we're in a gold literary age for Black writing, and I completely agree. And the University of Illinois Press has a lot to do with that, I think. Beautiful books come out of here, rigorous, thoughtful, provocative. So it's a wonderful time to be a reader. But my first golden age, experienced vicariously through my high-spirited, opinionated, and incredibly well-read mother, occurred in the 1970s and 80s, and it was glorious. Later, I would find authors who had not been on her shelf, like Zora, Audra, and Bell. Years later, I'd even get to work with Bell as an editor. But by high school and then college, my mother's reading habits had already become my own. And my mother had to search these books out, but she found them at libraries, on road trips, at Black-owned bookstores in Chicago and other places. The immediate backdrops of her book collecting was the rise of the Black power and Black arts movements, the emergence of the women's rights movement, and the flourishing of Black-owned bookstores throughout the U.S. In fact, dozens of new stores throughout the country, opened throughout the country in the late 60s. I'm kind of going, there's a reason for this diversion. Lots of them opened. There have been about a dozen Black bookstores in the mid-1960s, and that grew to more than 50 in the early 70s, and around 75 in the middle of the decade. So my mother and others were enthusiastically making trips to bookstores and participating in what some would call like an organic groundswell of interest in African history, culture, and politics that was happening in African American communities. But a disturbing hashtag publishing while Black side note, and it's an example of the racial profiling that stretches back over a long period in this country, as folks were buying these books, and I was jotting down the note here. So in his book, From Head Shops to Whole Foods, Joshua Clark Davis, published by Columbia University Press, I think in 2017, explored the investigations that Black booksellers across the country were enduring. So at the same time, COINTELPRO was up and running and, surveilling people illegally. Folks who ran Black bookstores were also being surveilled, and this included Louis Michaud and Una Muzak in New York City, Paul Coates, who is Ta-Nehisi Coates' father in Baltimore, Dawood Hakim and Bill Crawford in Philadelphia, Alfred and Bernice Ligon in Los Angeles, and the owners of the Sudiata bookstore in Denver. So, put plainly, the government, the FBI, saw Black-owned bookstores as fronts for activist organizations and believed they were actively fomenting Black Americans' growing fascination with Africa in the hopes of using it as a weapon against whites. In addition to the Herculean, economically perilous, and off-surveyed work of Black booksailors to get books out to readers like my mom, these books were surfaced by the work of pioneering editors at mainstream presses and independent presses. So folks like Dudley Randall, Hakeem Adabudi, and then also in New York, Toni Morrison was editing at Random House in the early 70s. So the people who were doing the work of acquiring books that had not been brought in were starting to do it and to push them out the door and get them supported. So I'm gonna make sure I didn't skip anything here. Yes.
I grew up thinking that I was really ugly because I never saw anyone who looked faintly like me being looked at as a beautiful person. The message that I got is that Black people and Black women did not matter. There were high expectations in our family for everyone, including my sister and me. I always was interested in writing and in English and in reading, and particularly in reading, devouring books. I had the opportunity to read Go Tell It on the Mountain. It was a complete break point moment because that was the first time I'd ever read anything that was remotely similar to the kind of family I was growing up in. The reason I went to graduate school was so I could teach African American literature. And there was not a single woman of color on the syllabus. Black studies and Black literature was about Black male experiences, and women's studies, which was just beginning at the same time, was very much about white women's experiences. We were just left out of the curriculum. It was wonderful. It was like every new day was a revelation. We were learning about ourselves. I mean, one of the ways you figure out who you are in the world is that you experience art that reflects your experience. And that's what we were doing every single day. Wow, I just read Their Eyes Were Watching God. You will not believe this book. We realized that until we had our own means of getting our voices out and our points of view out, that we would be a few steps back. We needed to have a press of our own. The books that we created and the pamphlets and the posters, they were so embraced. People were so excited. We really made an impact on mainstream publishing. You saw more and more women of color being published by those presses. People like Isabel Allende and Louise Erdrich, Maxine Hong Kingston, Amy Tan, Alice Walker, and Toni Morrison. And it's because we started it.
And that was Barbara Smith, who is still alive and kicking, and was one of the co-founders of Kitchen Table Press, founded in 1980-81, and around till the early part of the 90s. So in addition to a love of books, my publishing has been fueled by enduring political commitments and by a desire to see radical social change. And as a Black woman, raised in Chicago by migrants from the Deep South, and a committed and outspoken feminist and champion of all underdogs from age 8, and I'm not lying, check with my sisters, I've always been like this. My love of books and reading has always been married to these commitments. You can leave it there, actually, that's fine. Yes, please, thank you. So I feel like I owe huge debts to two women who I miss terribly, Audre Lorde, and my mother. My mom is up there. My mother, the head librarian at our house, brilliant musician and educator. There's an anniversary of hers coming up next week. She died from cancer on February 19th, 2011, and she was 75. And Audre is the other mythic elder figure in this talk, and an unparalleled multi-hyphenate. This accomplished and fierce writer was committed to a range of causes. She called herself a lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. She was that didn't even cover it all. Essayist, collectivist, publisher, world traveler. She was born on February 18th, 1934, and she died in November 1992 from cancer, and she was 58. So thinking about Audra, I reflected on a vintage publishing while black story. And when she passed in 1992, I was working at The Nation magazine as an editorial assistant and publicity manager. And despite my excitement at securing my first New York publishing job, I felt deeply tokenized for most of my time at The Nation. I was the most junior person on staff, on the editorial masthead, and the only person of color. And as I asked people, I learned that I may have been the first person of color listed on the editorial masthead ever, and that was in 1992. So I had a tough time there, and I told my parents, it's like I'm a visitor. They've invited over, but I've already overstayed my welcome a few months in. And I felt sidelined, without a mentor or anyone invested in my success. Not to mention my young, black, female, Midwestern, and non-Ivy League point of view. So after Audra passed in November 1992, I mustered up some courage and walked into the publisher's office. And when it suggested that we run a short obituary for her, as we often did for movement people, at the time of her death, she was the New York State Poet Laureate, and she had published a slew of books. She was a movement somebody. No question. I don't remember saying so in my brief pitch meeting, but I certainly felt that it was the least we could do. While the publisher approved these pieces routinely, he didn't seem to understand my request or who Audra was. So he asked me to type up the obit, or type up a memo. I think I typed half memo, half obit. And next day I got it back with a quick note of rejection, not for us. So it was not the last time I said to my publishing while black self, I am definitely working in the wrong place. But it rings as a particularly painful exchange in my career. And if I could wave a magic wand and write my Nation obituary about Audra, now I would simply say she did it all, always, and all the damn time. And she did it under great duress and facing great peril. As a black woman, as a lesbian, as a cancer survivor, as an artist, as the daughter of working class immigrant parents, as the queer mother of 2 children. She navigated, challenged, and exploded spaces that were unwelcoming, toxic, and hostile, over and over and over and over again. And in the face of relentless homophobia, misogyny, racism, and what we call today gaslighting, she prioritized rigor, connection, accountability, and honesty. As some of us still say, Audra was fierce. Here's Audra reading from Litany for Survival, a poem.
For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial, alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways, coming and going in the hours between dawn, looking inward and outward at once, before and after, seeking nows that can breathe future.
I remembered all of those particular things. I started writing because I had a need inside of me to create something that was not there.
So I'm saying a prayer for her today, as I know many in this room may be doing. And I'm also giving deep thanks to the University of Illinois Press for keeping her mission alive through the work of younger women who see her as a foremother. So another aside here, because I have a few of them in this talk. Before I started drafting the talk, the tentative title was My 9 Lives in Social Justice Publishing, because I wanted to foreground how inspired I have been by Audre Lorde Barbara Smith, and other activist editors. And I wanted to explore how my path has not been linear, why and how it's been improvised, circuitous, marked by setbacks and sometimes strokes of amazing fortune. For example, after feeling frustrated and constricted in a superb and rigorous PhD program, English PhD program at Duke, it was an absolute blessing for me to find work at Southend Press, where I worked in camaraderie with other activist editors for many years. I was there during a particularly productive and influential stretch. These are not my babies, but these are books that were being pushed out when I arrived at Southend in 2000. I got to work with Sherry. Noam Chomsky came to all my classes on alternative publishing and spoke at Emerson, which I could not believe. I got to work with Belle and break bread with her on a number of occasions. Miriam Chin Louie wrote an amazing oral history of factory workers in LA that did quite well for us and was exceptional. So it was an amazing place to work. My life changed after I started working there. This is a place where I learned everything that matters to me about publishing. So a little history. Southend was founded in 1997 as a worker-owned and operated collective. For its entire run, the most crucial decisions about hiring, acquisitions, policy change were made by consensus. And this is relevant to thinking about, the work of a publisher. Southend was set up to intervene on corporate publishing norms very explicitly, as was Kitchen Table, as you could see from that clip. Our mission statement was, Southend Press is an independent nonprofit, collectively run book publisher with more than 300 titles in press. Since our founding, we have met the needs of readers who are exploring, or who are already committed to, the politics of radical social change. Our goal is to publish books that encourage critical thinking and constructive action on the key political, cultural, social, economic, and ecological issues shaping life in the US and in the world. We hope to provide a forum for a wide variety of democratic social movements and to provide an alternative to the practices and products of corporate publishing. So we really attempted to operate with a rigorous racial justice lens with regards to hiring, marketing, design, translations, rights, the whole deal. And by the mid-2000s, Southend was a majority person of color press. So this is all part of my thinking of my 9 lives in social justice publishing. I was thinking I'll just kind of go through these things. But what I also was reminded of as I prepared is that with a couple of notable exceptions, including Southend, a racial justice or anti-racist praxis did not regularly animate or inform decisions or policies in most of the other places I worked. So as I drafted this paper, I also recalled experiences in corporate publishing. And they, some of them were wonderful and quite rewarding, and then some of them ranged from annoying to discouraging to enraging to demeaning to you had to see it to believe it. So as a result of that inventory, Publishing While Black emerged as my title. And I've spoken to many people in publishing. I'm sorry. I wanted to put up Kitchen Table Books too, because that's an example of a press that also intervened in corporate publishing. So, picture of the founders, and several of the books that came out when the press was in operation. So as I was saying, I've spoken to a number of people in publishing at every stage of their career, people of color, whose rich perspectives, networks, and skills have not been engaged or valued, who endure, process, and strategize because of the micro and macroaggressions and tokenizing that they encounter every day, who feel as if they are working in harm's way. This is a crazy list. It's a real list. So I could only fit a few things on there. I wanted to really think about the hashtag part of my title. while black. So, number of things, swimming at the pool in your own apartment complex, fouling a white man who's playing basketball with you, selling water without a permit. These are things that have got black folks in trouble. And so being in harm's way is an essential and salient element of doing anything while, hashtag while black. It means to be targeted and endangered. Under white supremacy, as this partial but true list of infractions illustrates, when black bodies trespass into places and activities that more powerful white bodies think they should be excluded from, we are profiled, targeted, surveilled, and punished. And sometimes we are removed. And removal can be anything from you leave a job that's hard to you're killed because you're in the wrong place. So parallels there. And the experiences of some people who work in publishing, people of color in publishing, have been documented in scholarly publishing, in Scholarly Kitchen. There was a piece in Medium a couple of weeks ago about women of color who work in publishing. There's a pattern that has emerged. So we should also look at the numbers of black folks or people of color broadly, all people of color in this survey who work in publishing. This is the first industry-wide survey of representation in publishing. It was done in 2015 by Lee and Lowe, an activist publisher in New York City. They do children's books, very forward-thinking children's books, and they're doing another survey of this kind. This year, and it's going to be larger, and thanks to the work of really wonderful people who I know, Hisela Fasado and Mike Backham, Hisela at Duke University Press and Mike's at University of Washington Press. There's going to be a number of university presses included in this survey. And the last survey was strictly trade. And we could just go through this and do it kind of like very quick orientation. I'll let you all take it in. So this is 2015, and you can see what the breakdowns are in terms of race, gender, sexuality, disability across the industry. And this survey drew from reporting from 35 publishers, trade. So, with this accumulation of information, we have data and we have qualitative information from people who work in the field. It feels like there's a very big gap between the conversations that are happening about diversity and inclusivity in publishing and what the reality is on the ground. There's a lot of talking happening, but there's not the shifts you would expect to see with so much discussion. And 2 days ago, I came across this tweet. And this is about UK publishing. Thank you. This was picked up in The Guardian. There was a survey done in the UK, and similar situation there, where books about, for instance, books centering kids of color in the kids lit section, 1% of all books. And I think the representation of people of color in the industry in Britain is worse than it is here. Overall, I don't want to flatten out too many things. I think there are some things happening in the UK that are really exciting around independent houses, but So, taking all this in, why is this going on? And what can be done? And I think I'm really looking forward to the Q&A at the end of the talk, because I'm very interested to hear different perspectives on this. I came across the work of a researcher, Marybeth Gassmann. She's the Judy and Howard Berkowitz Professor of Education in the Graduate School of Education at Penn. Her expertise areas include the history of American higher education, minority-serving institutions, with an emphasis on HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, racism and diversity, and higher education leadership. She's penned more than 350 opinion articles for newspapers and magazines in the US, and Education Week has ranked her as one of the most influential education scholars in the country. And the 5 things no one will tell you about why colleges don't hire more faculty of color, her 2016 article for the Hechinger Report, Gassmann recalled that she had recently been asked a question at a conference about the lack of faculty of color at many majority institutions, especially more elite institutions. Here's what she wrote. My response was frank. The reason we don't have more faculty of color among college faculty is that we don't want them. We simply don't want them. Those in the audience were surprised by my candor and gave me a round of applause for the honesty. I might have done that. So she continues to write, I've been a faculty member since 2000, working at several research universities. In addition, I give talks, conduct research and workshops, and do consulting related to diversifying the faculty across the nation. I've learned a lot about faculty recruitment over 16 years, and as a result of visiting many universities and colleges. So I think that she's relevant to what we're talking about, especially in terms of university presence, but in general, I think. And Gassmann then names these blockages as she has observed them directly within higher education. 5 things. So when she writes about quality, the word quality is used to dismiss people of color who are otherwise competitive for faculty positions, she writes. Typically, quality means that the person did not go to an elite institution for their PhD or wasn't mentored by a prominent person in the field. What people forget is that attending the elite institutions and being mentored by prominent people in the field is linked to social capital, and systemic racism ensures that people of color have less of it. The second most common excuse that Gassmann lists is there aren't enough people of color in the faculty pipeline. She writes, it is accurate that there are fewer people of color in some disciplines, such as engineering or physics. However, there are greater numbers of PhDs of color in the humanities and education, and we still don't have great diversity in these faculties. So when I hear someone say people of color are in the pipeline, I respond with, why don't you create the pipeline? Gassmann's third barrier is such a direct and routine gaming of the system that I think people don't want to acknowledge that it actually happens. Gassmann writes, I have learned that faculty will bend rules, knock down walls, and build bridges to hire those they really want, often white colleagues. But when it comes to hiring faculty of color, they have to play by the rules and get angry when any exceptions are made. She continues, let me tell you a secret. Exceptions are made for white people constantly in the academy. Exceptions are the rule in the academy. Gassmann also observes that faculty search committees are part of the problem. She writes, they are not trained in recruitment, are rarely diverse in makeup, and often more interested in hiring people just like them rather than expanding the diversity of their department. And even when they do receive a diverse group of applicants, often these applicants aren't the right fit for the institution. But what is the right fit? Someone just like you? Finally, Gassmann calls out majority colleges and universities for their arrogance. If they are truly serious about increasing faculty diversity, why don't they visit minority-serving institutions, institutions with great student and faculty diversity, and ask them how they recruit a diverse faculty? She writes, "This isn't hard," she writes. "The answers are right in front of us. We just need the will." We just need the will. So, Marybeth Gassmann says the reason we don't have more faculty of color among college faculty is that we don't want them. We simply don't want them. And I'm turning that over. So a couple of things to think about as we close, or as I close, and I'd love to get questions. I mentioned earlier that Kitchen Table Press, Southland Press, and other political publishers that opened in the late 70s, early 80s, before that, were safe harbors for people of color, safer harbors for people of color, radicals, progressive, queers. But by the 90s and 2000s, corporate publishing had figured this out, and they determined to get in for the money. And so while we were at Southland, we were having to figure out different ways to stay afloat, because the little area we had kind of carved out for ourselves was now getting eaten up, and that's how it goes. The problem is, that's the only lesson that seems to have been learned. Let's get the money. Let's monetize intersectionality, as Jennifer Nash, who sits on our press board at Northwestern University, at the press I worked at until last fall, who's amazing. She's writing about how the Academy has figured out ways to monetize intersectionality. And that's what I think publishing has done without making a commitment to actually changing the structures that keep people of color out as writers, as contributors, as staff. It's about the money. And if things had changed significantly since the lessons of these political publishers were in their ascent, I don't think I'd be talking with you about diversity and anti-racism in 2019. And the institutions and presses that we're connected to would look different and operate differently. More importantly, they would operate differently. So this last chart was attached to the Scholarly Kitchen piece that anybody can find online. I'm guessing that many of you saw it. The first-person testimonials of folks who work in scholarly publishing. And this is a really impactful graphic. And I'll just let folks take it a little bit at a time. So I'd like to suggest, if you hear someone say that someone is not a good fit for an organization, think twice. Could be code for something very different. And to consider what we're losing out on. I'm going to pause. Thank you for your time. Would love that.
So first of all, thank you so much for coming in today. That was a great presentation. I'm a grad student at the iSchool, which is the Library and Information Science Department, and we've had this discussion many times about people of color in librarianship, because as you know, it's very white women run field. And it's not just academic librarianship, but public librarianship as well. And a lot of people come to the conclusion that it's mostly limiting of access for people of color in education, where they finish their undergraduate degree and there's not as many financial opportunities available in graduate education, and the only option is just to take out more loans, and it's not exactly a well-paying field at the end of it either. So you come to this conclusion that it's all about capital. And I was just wondering, do you feel like that's a similar issue in publishing, that just the lack of education, financial opportunities, and the lack of education opportunities in general, as well as the discrimination within the field itself?
And can you name exactly what you're calling in addition to the discrimination within the industry? Can you name that again? Name that element?
The financial capital, or?
The difficulty in, I'm pushing you.
No, that's okay. I'm just, the education opportunities, the financial opportunities, scholarship, and I'm wondering what I said because I don't remember what I said exactly.
I know, I do remember what you said. I just wanted to make sure I was getting the right bit out.
Okay.
Right? So you're asking if, in addition to discrimination, racism, structural racism within publishing, as it exists in many, all industries, if there are special barriers for folks who may want to go into publishing that are attached to how much it costs to get through school, how much it might cost to get additional training, how much it costs to get a graduate degree, which is often required in scholarly publishing. It's certainly, something that people want. Yeah, I would have to say that has to be a factor, and there are barriers to each of those things that are also about systemic racism, right? So it's a root problem. But certainly, and publishing is kind of, part of the joy of being here is that you're opening up the doors and letting people know what publishing is, and that would be folks who are wanting to write for the press, advanced graduate students who will need to write and publish, and then folks who might just want to consider going into publishing. So I think greater awareness of it as a track, and as a place where people can be creative. You won't make big bucks, but you can be creative and do other kinds of work. Yeah, I think that is a factor. I would agree.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, thinking about Marybeth Gassmann's typology of the 5 things that she gave us, and thinking about her statement that they just don't want us, my question is, how can we begin to change the culture of publishing and make presses want those people who are historically marginalized? How can we take her typology and make it be realized in the day-to-day practice of acquiring books and things like that?
What a great question. So I didn't come with a lot of answers, right? I really came to just see if people agreed with me that this is a problem, and that for me, it is a problem about will. I think if there is a determination made that this is a problem, and intention is made, then all kinds of things follow from that, right? So I won't give you a fully fleshed out answer. But, I think that so I work at the Kellogg Foundation now, and everything that we do at the Kellogg Foundation has a racial justice lens attached to it, from the grants that we decide to make, the organizations that we decide to support, to how we run internally. And it really changes the way you do business. And things take longer. If you're committed to working with contractors, vendors, people of color, if you're trying to make sure you're doing that work as a foundation. It takes longer to find folks sometimes, or you have to, so that's one very transactional thing. There are hard conversations that happen because you're committed to doing that. A range of things. I would say the same thing was true at South End. We had to spend more time on process. And, you know, because that's how we ran. I was on a panel at AUP last June where we talked about building in inclusivity and anti-racist practice across the whole publishing experience, right? From acquisitions to production, design, marketing. And I was with some stellar folks, people at a number of presses, doing different roles. So I was the acquisitions editor, there was a design person, a marketing person. So really what we talked about there was, what does it mean to be intentional in this way? It takes more time. You gotta be ready for some conflict. Gotta be ready for discomfort. But it takes a commitment, and it needs to be a long-term commitment. It's not like, we're gonna do this in one day and it's done. No. So I think there needs to be an awareness that whatever you're gonna do in this register is going to take time, it's going to take money, it's not going to be comfortable, and it's going to demand accountability, transparency. And as I said in the talk, some of the most important lessons I learned at South End, and those were things that we did routinely: transparency, accountability, kind of a flatter structure. Not everybody can be a collective. Not everybody should be. But I think those values need to be lifted up along with the diversity talk.
Thank you for a really interesting talk. A lot of us, I know I am in this room not from the publishing end of things, but from the higher ed end of things. I specifically work on helping humanities majors get jobs, so that's kind of my angle on learning more about the publishing industry. And I was really, startled by what you said about South Bend Press's story, that they had this market niche of intersectionality, and then that got co-opted by corporations. And it seems like similar kinds of things are happening in higher ed as public funding for public universities dry up. And I see the institution and all its component parts trying to find ways to monetize anything that can be monetized. And in some ways that can have kind of a superficial veneer of being, a useful thing. After all, people of color are consumers. So suddenly we're seeing lots of, interracial couples and ads, and that's certainly better than the images we saw reflected back in the past, but still there's a purpose behind it, and it's not wholly good. And in the same way, there's a lot of university initiatives that sort of have a pleasant-looking veneer on them, but, underneath is just this market frame of value framing absolutely everything. And I was just wondering if there were any lessons to be learned from the experiences of the publishing industry about what could have been done differently, how that might have been handled differently, things that we can, learn from in higher ed to, face the financial realities around us, but not to be stupid about it either.
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Can you name a specific initiative that's kind of, or not something that you see happening specifically in higher ed that's going in this way? So you have a better beat on it?
Well, when I don't want to, I don't know.
I'm not asking for names.
I don't want to be too precise, but, one sees these administrative positions being created that are, diversity ambassador for such and such.
Yeah.
And, usually awesome people get hired and, are paid what they're worth, but it's kind of not clear what that actually means in terms of getting more students of color in the door and helping them flourish.
Got it. Thanks for, I kind of got you. I would actually love to hear from the room about this. I think that publishing publishing and scholarly publishing, my sense is that we want to take the lead in these areas and be kind of in the vanguard, because we should be. We should be. But we're not there yet, right? So that's my opinion. We're not, the work's not happening, or the numbers would look different, and these stories would not be circulating, being published, discussed. So I'm not sure. I think we're in a similar place, as you said at the top. There's a desire to do this, a desire to be committed to inclusivity, and I would say, instead of diversity, anti-racism, because I think that's an important difference, right? One way I think about it is that diversity is an outcome. Anti-racism is a practice. Without the practice, you don't really get the outcome. You know, so I feel like we're in a similar place, but other people in the room may have a different take. So I'm sorry to kind of punt.
Does anyone want to speak to that before we ask for another question? Other questions?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to take a shot at that last point there. I've been on a lot of different organizational boards, and a lot of times when you're on that board, you're all swimming in the same tiny little bowl, and you only know what's there. And so maybe, and I'm not going to speak for anybody, but I mean, it could be a possibility that an organization may say, hey, we need to have more color in our area, and they think it's a great idea, and then they go out and they make this plan, but because they have absolutely no clue as to how to reach the audience, it's not, like you said, the uncomfortable part, about the whole thing about working in an area, that little cartoon you had of the woman in the workplace. And so it may also be a point of that, exactly, where they don't know how to reach out. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to get a hold of. They don't know how to talk or have outreach. And at the same point in time, you have these people who may want to be included, and they too have no idea how to get in. And that's my point.
Yeah, that's real. And I really appreciate you being honest about it, that there are groups, organizations, who, I think it's good to think about intent too, right? So what would make that organization that you were thinking of, or a couple organizations, if you were thinking of more than one, want to be more inclusive and bring more color into their space, right? So, or anything. Right, so I think you have to know why you're doing it. And you have to be really purposeful. You need to, it's hard to talk about it without knowing I could be talking about any kind of institution right now, hospital, a school, a nonprofit, right? But I think the roster approach to diversity, where you just go out and get folks of color and you don't change how you do business, that's where you end up with people leaving and no lessons learned. So I think you have to think about why you're doing it and talk to other people. And if you're a leader in that kind of organization, and do some homework. And if you're a white person trying to think about these issues of diversity, anti-racism, inclusivity, and you're working in a place where you have some power to affect change, you have to really think about it and not just do without preparing. I'm not really answering your question completely, but I think your question is very valuable, and I'm sorry I don't have a more kind of fleshed out response to it, because I think the instinct needs to be, you have to think about why you're doing it.
I guess the point is, if you don't know how can you? And I think that some organizations just don't know how.
Sure.
And if you don't know how, and everybody around doesn't know how, and you don't have the nuances of getting to where you want to be, so you try some things and they fail because you don't know how.
Sure.
Leadership. If you don't know how, you have to hire leadership. Sorry. Like, it's the way we make structural change is that we have to not just hire people of color. We have to hire people of color in positions of leadership. We have to take leadership from people of color. So it's great to admit, like, I don't know how to do that. That's like a great first step. And I would just say, like, then who does, and how do you bring that in, and how do you start having those processes intentionally as an organization? Like, we've inherited white supremacy as our press, or as our public aid office, or so what does it look like for us to practice transformative justice? And it's going to take a while, and it's going to be difficult, and there needs to be support systems for folks to do that. But I'm sorry, just felt like I wanted to respond.
Please. I want you to keep on going. Yeah.
So, I think that in some ways it's, we have to practice the politics, I'll speak as a white woman, we have to practice the politics of being uncomfortable. And there's a great book called White Fragility. I encourage folks to read it. And I think it's important for us to separate out how we feel about something from a just path forward. And I think, as a feminist, I feel like I learned that in talking with men and trying to create spaces where it's like, this might not be comfortable for you because it's not your people, it doesn't feel like your culture, it's not like, it's different where you come from, but it's the right path forward. So you work to forge that path forward, and you have a therapist to talk about the discomfort with. You work your shit out because that's real, and it's an important part of the process, and it's not to be sidelined. It's an important part of the process.
Danielle covered it.
Can I ask a question since I have microphones? Thank you, Jill, so much for coming. First, I just want to say the kitchen table press is like my entry as an 18-year-old, queer kid in college in a university that had no gender studies program. Like, that press, we just took every book presented by that press, and we read it, and we created our own gender studies collective. And as a result, New College, which is a tiny college in Sarasota, Florida, now has a gender studies program. And what we did when we started it, our first symposium was called the Minority Women Studies Symposium, because we felt like we needed to start with women of color. And it was in part because of reading those texts, and those were my first feminist texts. So I just wanted to say I appreciate you highlighting that history and how important an intervention like that can be in our lives. Okay, second thing is, so I'm not an academic. I have no PhD. I probably will never have a PhD. I'm an organizer, so I've been organizing for the last 30 years, primarily with low-income families and with racial justice networks. So folks asked me for many years, like, how do you do what you do? you know, how did you win this campaign? How did you get this person elected? Great, Carol Emmons campaign for state rep. She's the first black woman as our state rep. So and I decided, okay, I should write a book about this. So I'm writing a book that is an attempt to answer the question, how do we make changes in systems? And it actually is like, it's theory, but it's also practice down to exercises that you can do. Like, here's an assignment that you can do while you're doing this. So it's a very strange book. It's not going to be, you know, it's not like very marketable in some ways because it doesn't fit a category. So my question to you, it's like the reason I came to this conference was asking these questions. So, my question to you, Jill, is what would you encourage for the public intellectuals, I'm not the only one, or the organizers, like as we're attempting to move into the space of publishing, what are some of the tips or approaches that you would offer to folks who really want to speak to a broad audience of folks who want to make change in systems? And I know it's a little bit different than your talk, but thank you for being here.
Oh, what a fabulous question. There are a number of editors in the room, including me, we should talk. I work for Haymarket Books on the side. I'm still doing some acquisitions. So when I was at South Bend, we did actually have a few books that were kind of toolkitty in the way you're talking about. And they're very valuable. And I don't diminish their importance. They're really useful because organizers don't often write their histories, right? So we don't get to learn how things change. They don't have time. You know, I'm working on a project right now that I'm super excited about that involves a leading union leader, right? And I'm hoping that we're gonna get some information from her that we can share with the world, right? So I think that kind of book can fill a void because the folks who are doing the work don't always have time to document that work. So it's incredibly important. I'm going to give you some boilerplate stuff, and then I hope other folks in the room who work in acquisitions might have suggestions as well, right? But have you ever written a book proposal before? I'm guessing maybe no, because based on your question, or maybe yes.
I finished my book proposal this week and 2 finished chapters and a table of contents. So I'm like kind of ready to start approaching folks.
Got it. And as you did the book proposal, how did you source it? Like what resources did you find through? Did you look at other ones that were kind of like this book and model it on that?
Yeah, my goal has been basically to read every book that's coming out. That's like, what, you know, it's the WTF books, like, oh my God, Trump, what did we do? And then also it's like Grace Lee Boggs, who wrote, you know, who's been, and you know, basically the last 10 years of writing that answers the same kind of questions. I've read those books and looked at who's published and have essentially listed those as what I would call the context for this particular book.
You've done your homework, right? So a good book proposal, Dawn knows, she talks about this, a good proposal, you need to not only pitch your idea and pitch yourself as the person who should do it because of your connections, your history, your vision, you know. You also need to show that you know the field and you know where your book is going to sit on the shelf with the other ones at the bookstore. You know what you're talking about, and you know what your book is bringing that these other books are not bringing. So it's kind of a trick. It's not totally fair. You know, you want to say that you know what the field looks like and how great the field is, but here's my intervention. Here's my added value. So it sounds like you've already done a very robust lit review. You know it's out there. You've got 2 chapters written. Have you been sharing it with other people?
Just started yesterday because we finished the polished, I have a co-author, so we finished the polished package and we started pushing it out to our outreach list to ask folks. I mean, we didn't have initial readers, and then we polished the prospectus of the chapters based on the 5 readers that we had initially. So now we're kind of like reaching out.
Why are you asking me anything?
Because I'm not a publisher, so I feel like I'm like swimming in water that I'm, with jellyfish, and I don't know what I'm,
You're doing everything right, because, often people finish a proposal, finish a chapter, nobody has seen it. And they're very protective. It hasn't had any oxygen come into it. So you're doing it in collective, you're letting folks see it, you're doing the research on the field, you're on top of that. And I think that the part of the proposal that always, when I was looking at proposals, often the weakest part of the proposal was around well, what are the other books, the marketing part, and also what are you able to bring as an author in terms of your own connections, networks, affiliations to help lift the book up. So you always want to cover the who you are, why you're the woman to do it, the why this book is necessary, the what is this book about, and who could also mean who's going to be served by this book, what movements, is you're a movement person, what movements are going to be supported by this book, the when will it be done, and the why is baked in there because that's part of what's the book about. You just want to cover all of that, in a way that somebody will feel like she's got it, it's persuasively written, and you write your proposal and your chapter in the same way. It should be accessible, not jargony, and persuasive. So I feel like you already have everything I was going to suggest, you've done it.
There were some things, so thank you. That's really helpful.
Of course.
It's after fun. You guys want to keep going? Okay. I have a comment and a question. The comment is, I love what you said about diversity versus social justice or racial justice. I have long thought this, I periodically say this. I think universities in particular, can deal with what they imagine diversity to be much more than social justice, and racial justice scares the hell out of them. So I want you to keep saying this.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge difference between the two. And I don't think that the institutions we work for really understand. I just know the reaction whenever I suggest an alternative.
Sure. I agree. And I'm thinking about, you're still here, yeah, you're asking about how to make this happen, right? I think there are increasingly more and more resources out there for folks who want to make that shift. Who are in organizations, who are in companies, who are in institutions where they want to see that shift happen. So, what's I'm thinking about? Let's see. So, for instance, one of the groups that Kellogg supports is in Buffalo, and I'm not going to get the name of this group right, but it's a community foundation, and they have leaned really hard into the business case for diversity, right? This is not the way I would go. This is not the way I would go. However, what they've been able to do by doing that is they're bringing business folk across areas in Buffalo to the table and introducing them to tools where they can think about their decision making from a racial equity point of view. So they get them in the room, and then they really do real racial justice work. And they have tools that allow folks to go through every aspect of running the business. I'm simplifying big time. But I think what I'm saying is that there are tools, there are resources. And if you want to find them, you can.
Or to paraphrase, you bring them in with whatever language they can deal with, and then you give them a different story.
Sometimes.
Here at this university, but I would be really proud if this university were to change its tune, but it doesn't.
It's, I hear you. But I think anything, if you're an activist, I feel like you might be.
I'm on the faculty here.
All right, well, it doesn't mean you're not an activist. We're in it for the long haul.
See what I teach.
What do you teach?
A variety of courses, introduction to anthropology, social anthropology, anti-racism, racism, American quotation marks in the world.
Yeah, you're doing the work. You're doing the work. You're doing the work. And I think we just have to do what we can do it in fellowship, be ready to take criticism, seek it, and know that things take a while sometimes, but not in a complacent way.
Let me ask you a quick question. I don't know that the answer is quick.
We'll do our last question.
Oh, okay.
You can stay.
You talked about faculty and the publishing industry sort of as if they were the same, and at least I don't know if it's the same.
Okay, in terms of like,
I would love the nonprofit scholarly world to take the lead, because I don't think it's happening the other way around. But from what you presented, I actually think the publishing world is worse than colleges and universities.
it's more hidden.
Well, Jill, it's just been a joy to have you here, and thank you so much. We just want to give you a little book goodie bag. We've got some books and swag, and what we chose for our centennial to kind of foreground our commitments was a quote from one of our books. So, yes, books are meat and medicine, and flame and flight and flower, steel, stitch, and cloud and clout, and drumbeats on the air. It's a battle call. So, thank you so much. Thanks to all of you, and please don't forget to take a survey and let us know what ideas you have and suggestions for our next symposium a year from now. Thank you very much.